And you kind of felt, as a junior broker, I felt like I was just parachuted into this parallel universe that I was really kind of struggling to find my feet. But I would say it was a very flamboyant stage. There were a lot of real characters in the market at that time.
Welcome to Trade Treasury Payments, the podcast unlocking the future of cross-border finance.
From transaction banking and money movements
to liquidity, treasury, and cash management.
We bring you expert insights and the latest trends shaping global finance.
Welcome to Trade Treasury Payments Studios. I'm Deepesh Patel, Editor-in-Chief, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Sian Aspinall, outgoing Group CEO at BPL. Sian, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you for coming. So, Sian, 1992 seems like quite a while ago. That's when you stepped into insurance. What did the London market really look like back then, and what feels almost unrecognizable today?
Yes, I actually did an internship in about 1990, so just slightly predating that. And it was a period of change for Lloyd's. It was at its height, but also at the point where they were questioning the unlimited liability for personal names. So when I came into the market, it had this unique air about it. There were about 400 syndicates up and down the escalators as a broker, really not really understanding the etiquette, the terminology. It was steeped in history and tradition, but it had its own. It was like a microcosm of its own sort of business conduct rules. And you kind of felt, as a junior broker, I felt like I was just parachuted into this parallel universe that I was really kind of struggling to find my feet. But I would say it was a very flamboyant stage. There were a lot of real characters in the market at that time. I'm not saying that sort of like the long lunches didn't kind of fuel that, but it really had an energy and a life and a colour that was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. And it was very intimidating, but it was also, as I say, very theatrical. And I really do think that even though a lot has changed now in terms of professionalism, in terms of analysts, in terms of systems, in terms of all of those things, what I worry about that it might have lost a bit of is that entrepreneurial spirit, because there's a creativity that comes from that flamboyance and that theatrical air. And I just sometimes worry a little bit that we've taken some of that colour out of the equation, but obviously for professional reasons. But it did have something special that maybe isn't quite so obvious today.
But surely with that theatre, did you have any coping mechanisms? I mean, it must have been a completely different industry. How did you survive?
It was a really alien culture to me. I didn't have a background in the industry. I really had no prior knowledge of what to expect. I realised that I was very different to the average person in there. And I didn't even understand the language. I mean, so I would go in and I would psych myself up to go on stage effectively, which sounds a little bit exaggerated, but that's kind of how it felt to me, that I really had to be a little bit outside of my own personal comfort zone. But I think you have to challenge yourself. And I think that's good to have that early lesson in your career, because you don't really grow and you don't really start to belong unless you push those boundaries of where your own confidence and sort of your own barriers kind of can constrain you if you don't push on through. So, yeah, very interesting times, very challenging times. But I learned a lot, not just about the industry, but more probably about myself. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it was good. It was good.
Well, I'd like to come on to that a bit later, but let's talk about the industry itself, trade credit insurance, CPRI, and you started, or one of your first careers was at BPL, and then you came back in 2014 and you became Group CEO of the organisation in 2022. What would you say over that tenure have been the biggest ways both CPRI and trade credit insurance have evolved over that time?
There have been, as you can imagine, quite significant changes over that period of time. I think one of the biggest changes was when I first came into the market, the transactions that were being bound and that were being looked at and considered from a risk perspective were kind of unbankable. So they were the transactions that the banking industry were not comfortable taking. So you kind of felt like as an underwriter in those days, I felt like I was walking through a bit of a minefield, going back to first principles, very much looking at bargaining positions, sectors, seniority, all of those relationships in countries, etc. All of those really first principles and honing those skills. Well, with the changes in the banking regulation and the fact that banks could become insurers and actually get capital relief from the product as an unfunded guarantee, that really changed the parameters of the risks that came into the market. It gave a wider portfolio of risks. It really encouraged more capacity into the market because the risks were eminently more insurable than they maybe had been in those early days, and the balance and portfolios people could create were much wider. And so the growth in the market is just exponential because of that, not just in the banking space, but obviously that's been a big catalyst. And I mean, I think in the last IACPM ITFA survey on credit insurance, and that's only on a fixed number of banks reporting, is that we're up to 192 billion in insured exposure. And that is just unrecognizable from the market that I walked into. It's just a different space.
And I think as the industry grows, it needs to be able to adapt, and I guess it probably needs that collective voice, whether that's in regulation, capital treatment, sanctions and compliance expectations, or market standards. What roles do bodies like IACPM or ITFA play within that?
I think they're crucial. I honestly think they're crucial because they create a credible voice. I think the industry struggled because of its size primarily earlier, that you need to be a certain stature to actually have a voice. But I think the problem is that you always have competitive frictions in that, and whether there are conflicts of interest coming into those equations of what people are pushing for. So I think trade bodies are just they are just perfect of taking that out of the equation and focusing on things that are for the greater good of the industry as a whole. I think ITFA on the banking regulatory advocacy has made huge grounds in bringing the market together with a collective voice, obviously IACPM as well. And that has really come about because the market has been more relevant to their membership. And as the market gets bigger and becomes more relevant, then it can create its own voice, and the trade bodies then are very good at taking that forward. I think prior to that, it was too small, too insignificant, under the radar, lots of confidentiality clauses in wordings that meant people didn't really talk about it, and therefore it kind of suffered because of that it didn't have the relevance that the value of the product actually deserved.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Sian, I guess what's one change you're particularly proud of, either at BPL or through your involvement at ITFA or some of the other associations, whether it's a product shift, a regulatory change, or market practice that really has materially improved outcomes?
I thought about this, and I think the aspect that I'm proudest of is the way that BPL handled the Insurance Act when it came in. It's obviously 2015, but was effective in August 2016. I've lost 10 years. And the problem with that, it was because it was a sea change shift in the legal environment that was for the benefit of clients, but had to be considered in credit insurance against the requirements of the CRR for an unfunded guarantee. And a lot of the Insurance Act wasn't defined. Now, if a bank can't control the terms and conditions of the policy, then they cannot get capital relief. So it was like standing in the motorway with a huge juggernaut coming towards us, and the rest of the industry not really realizing the significance of what we were facing, that if we didn't find a workable solution for this to get the wordings to work for CRR in a new legal environment that wasn't tested with no case law, we were going to have a significant problem day one of its effectiveness. And so huge push internally. We really worked with lawyers, we worked with the market, we got an acceptable clause put through for fair presentation, which is new disclosure laws, and that is now kind of the benchmark for the market. And I am so proud of the fact we got that in, but we did it because it was the right thing to do, not necessarily the easiest thing to do, or the fact that there wasn't a lot of other people kind of jumping to that cause at the time. I'm really proud of that we put the work in and we got that through for the clients. So they reaped the benefit of the Act and didn't suffer the CRR consequences of not getting it right.
And I'm sure we see them reaping the benefit to this very day.
The clauses haven't changed, so hopefully they work, yes. And the claims payment record sort of speaks to that. So, yeah.
Hey, enjoying this podcast? Hit that follow button for more. Done? Let's get back to it.
And another piece which, let's be honest, not many people are talking about at the moment, and you've continuously pushed the industry forward on, which is diversity, equity and inclusion, women empowerment, representation, culture, ensuring everyone, no matter what their background is represented. First of all, what have you learned about the benefit of building diverse, highly performing teams in a specialist market like ours? And where does our sector need to raise its game?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. Obviously, I've been in the market quite a long time, and it has changed, and it's changed for the better. But what I've learned is that diverse groups make better decisions because they bring different backgrounds, different experience, different perspectives, and all of those are really invaluable in making sure that you've made the right considerations when you take a decision in a company. And it's been proved, obviously, that mixed boards are generally more profitable than companies without mixed boards. So I think the evidence is there. I think it's how you achieve that. What I've learned from my own experience is you can't change from the outside, you have to change from the inside. To change from the inside, you have to be accepted. So don't rail against the machine, you have to work with the machine and then enlighten the machine as to why it should be maybe heading in different directions. That's my own personal experience. I wouldn't have been heard unless I was accepted. To be accepted, I had to work very hard. I had to kind of always try to improve my own offering. And then you have credibility. And once you have credibility, you can bring change. If you don't get credibility, nobody will listen to you. And so that's what I've learned along the way, is that you have to go with it in order to change its direction. You can't just rail against it from the outside because that won't bring any change about. In terms of what the market could do, I think it's great that there is a lot more representation now. You'd say minorities, but obviously some of those are not minorities. They're 50% of the population. But if you take it from ethnicity, if you take it from all sorts of, obviously different categorization of diversification, I think it is a lot better up to a certain level. And I think most people within it think it has changed. But if you look up, it hasn't changed. And there are less obvious barriers that are probably less... I don't think people even appreciate they're there, but it's not changing at the top. And that is the bit that really frustrates me. And why have we got that problem? Because we know that better decisions are made from more diverse leadership teams, and that is common across any industry. So why are we preventing this happening, and what is preventing it happening? Is it lack of good role models? Is it industry bias that's kind of unconscious bias? I don't know. I just hope that the next generation, if they keep the trajectory, it will change and we will have a much better representation. But at the moment, I look around and it's kind of not there.
Sian, for someone just starting their career in banking or insurance, what advice would you give to them today as, someone who's, leaving the industry, sadly, to think about as they're advancing their career?
I think one of the things that was always very important to me was to be true to yourself. Obviously, you have to fit into an environment, you have to work hard, I think you have to build a good network. And typically that is mixing with people that you have natural affinity to. And as they grow within the industry, then you have, which is what happened to me, good people to lean on for advice and different perspectives when you're faced with some of those career decisions and some of those career challenges. I think you can't overvalue, a good network on that. I had it. I lent on it. It brought the human side into the job, but it really did help me. But my confidence, all of those things that enable you to be true to self. Just don't underestimate the value of a good network. But when I say a network, I mean reliable, trusted individuals who are within your profession that you can lean on for advice and that you can likewise provide advice to them. So there's a symbiotic relationship. That would be my advice.
Thank you, Sian. And final question, as you hand over the baton to James Reynolds, what priorities do you think he should be watching out for as the market continues to evolve at BPL? And where would you like in terms of your leadership skills to remain within BPL?
I think obviously everybody comes with a slightly different package when they take over that role. There's elements of self which make, which are obviously things that will make slight changes to an organization. I think one of the big challenges for the industry is AI. Mm-hmm. I currently, and it may just be my age, I kind of look at it and I'm not sure exactly where it takes us. There's a huge amount of efficiency gains. What that means for a broking community, and as a broker, you have to add value. You have to be seen to add value, or you don't deserve to be in the value chain. And so, what will that value look like? How it will be presented in a world of AI and machine learning, I think is yet to be obviously developed and brought to fruition. So I think obviously James will have his own perspective on that, and I'm not trying to obviously project my views onto him, but I think it's an area that will be a real, not necessarily disruptor is probably sounding too much of a negative word, but I think it's definitely something to watch to see how the industry will evolve. And then your second question about my own legacy, which probably sounds a bit grand. I always wanted to have, I think culture comes from the top. I think what you do, how you present, how you treat people, how hard you work, all of those things are highly visible as a CEO. I wouldn't really ask people to do anything that I myself, if I had the wherewithal, wouldn't be prepared to do. And it's to treat people with respect and to run the company as a meritocracy, to take politics as much as possible out of the equation and really not have a structure that doesn't reward political behaviour, that rewards the value of the whole, not the value of the individual, and to value each individual for what they bring to that whole, and to make sure that that is recognised and transparent within the industry and within the company. And I think that would be the legacy that I would really be honoured to feel that I left just a trace of that behind.
Sian, what a legacy. Thank you so much. And we really wish you and your family all the best. Thank you so much for everything you've done to the industry.
Oh, absolute pleasure. And thank you for the opportunity today. It's been great. Thank you.
And don't forget to follow Trade Treasury Payments
On your favorite podcast platform.
Thanks for listening.